This week's video is about f-numbers and fast and slow telescopes. I also managed to get in a little bit of moon imaging, and you'll be able to see those images at the end of this video. Hi everybody, I hope you're keeping well. This week I wanted to look at f-numbers. Now, a question was asked of me, what do f-numbers mean when you hear f12 or f5 or f2? Or what does it mean when somebody says something is a fast telescope or a fast lens as opposed to a slow telescope or a slow lens? So I wanted to delve right in. Now, the f number is a ratio. It's a ratio of, if we draw our telescope here, so if I draw a telescope going across there, and we have a lens here, it's a very simple telescope here, and then we have an eyepiece here. So we know that the focal length of our telescope is from here to wherever it focuses. So that is our focal length, just there. So we'll call that FL. And this lens here has a diameter, and we'll call that the aperture. So it's the aperture of the scope. All an f number is the ratio of the aperture into the focal length. So let's say that this telescope is labelled f5 and the aperture here was 10 centimetres. So we could work out the focal length of this telescope by timesing 10 by the f5, which would give 50. So we would know that the focal length of this telescope would be 50 centimetres and the aperture would be 10 centimetres. So we could divide 50 by 10 and it gives us f5. That was the cat. So in this case, we've got an f5 telescope, and that's kind of considered to be a good middle ground for astrophotography with a telescope. You can get a lot faster, you can get sort of f3 or f2, but f5 seems to be a good middle ground. But what exactly does that mean? It refers to the speed with which light can be gathered through that telescope. So for example, well, if you take an f5 telescope, and that's considered quite fast, and you did, say, a 1 minute exposure of an object in the sky, if you then used an f10 telescope to gather the same amount of light as you did with the f5 telescope, you'd have to double the exposure length. So let's say with an f5 telescope you did a 1 minute exposure, with the f10 telescope you'd have to double that to 2 minutes to gather the equivalent amount of light. As a general rule of thumb, depending on what sort of subjects you're shooting, you will choose a telescope with a different f number. So for super bright objects, like for example the planets, when you're shooting, say, Saturn or Jupiter or Venus, you would want a telescope with an f number that's quite high. So you want something like an f10 or an f12, because the f number also allows you to get greater magnification. For deep sky objects, you've got a really tricky balance. So for nebulae, what you want is quite a fast f number, so you want sort of f5 and lower. But that also means that you have a really wide field of view. So for galaxies, you've got a really tricky balance, because a lot of galaxies are quite small and very far away, unless of course you're shooting Andromeda, which is massive and really near. But most galaxies are quite small, so you need to have an f number that gives you the amount of magnification you require to get the detail. You're really looking for an f number which is higher than f5, where your amount of light gathering is going to take longer, so you need very long exposures to gain the equivalent amount of light gathering that you would get with a lower f number. I hope that was useful. I wanted to clarify what was meant by an f number, and also what's meant by a fast telescope and a slow telescope, and where you might use them. Take care everybody, stay safe, I'll see you soon. So we managed to get outside this week and do a few more images of the moon. So here are some close-ups of the moon, and also a mosaic of 3 pictures glued together.